How you doing, Ken? Always on time. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ramon. How are you tonight?
Doing all right?
Doing good.
I'm in the last. Hi, Paul.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
Hey, Paul.
Hey, Ken.
I'm in the last concluding chapter of the book, Caste.
hmm
And like the New York Times said, it's a Eastern American classic. And it is very depressing because she makes a very persuasive case that we have something very similar to what they have in India, uh, caste. Okay? And when you have a caste system, people really protect the caste privileges. So it's not something that simply by reading a book like How to Be an Anti-Racist and basically rational. This book is very rational and engineers repetition, but I feel that this book is not the kind of book. Well, this kind of book is very logical. It's about, in my opinion, what this book is doing is kind of concentrating on policies and things that people do that are really lead to racism, really very rational. But caste is a sociological study from the point of view of sociologists. What, uh, what do we have in the United States?
Hey, Bobby.
Hi.
Hey, Bobby, I got something nice to tell you about Protestantism.
What did you hear or
Well, I
read?
started reading, I started reading this book. It was reviewed by the New York Times, but it also was reviewed recently by The Economist, okay? And this guy, the beginning of that book, talks about how Martin Luther led to a tremendous increase in literacy. That's kind of well known for many, many years that Protestants said that people needed to establish a personal connection with God and Jesus, not go through a priest or something.
Right.
Well, it turns out that this guy, people did that, but the quality of the research in this area, it's amazing. They have actually identified natural experiments in which they show centers of Protestantism and how far away you are. And the more you move away, the lower the literacy. And they compare Catholic places with the same condition, but compared to the Protestant places. And you can see that it is not only a correlation, but it is a cause and effect relationship between Protestantism and the increase. And the interesting thing about it is that it happened before the Industrial Revolution or even the Scientific Revolution. So Protestantism created a group of people that were educated, people that were farmers and all kinds of things like that, were teaching their children to read. So when the Industrial Revolution came, they had a group of people that were ready to take Now, one of the things that I keep reflecting all the time is Ken and I have had a discussion about, he reads his books about psychology and whatever, and he tells me, oh, if it feels good to me, feels it touches me, it's good for me. And I keep saying all the time that I need data. And, I need data and I need data. And one of the things that I find out is that when an expert presents something and you don't take the trouble of understanding what is the basis of his statement, you treat everything like opinion. The guy said, I have a a cousin, who I told him to read this book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street, which is, 14th edition. I have read it, read every edition since the 1980s, and made me a millionaire, that book, because I knew how to invest and all of that. And that book is very good because it talks about every fact there was and where they made mistakes. So if you read that book, you know how they can trick you. And today, the problem of investing in well-followed markets is a problem that is completely solved. You can actually implement, modern portfolio theory, okay? With the computers, there's big data. You have information about well-followed markets around the world, and you have correlations that seem to be more stable than performance, so you can decide what combination of those things you can do. So fundamentally, you should not invest in the markets except through a robo-advisor. It's a completely solved problem, okay? Well, I told my cousin to actually read that book, and he said, no, I just want to know the recommendations. So what happens? Since he only read the recommendations, to him, their opinion. You see what I'm saying? The same thing with this Protestantism thing. I read the story about Protestantism bringing literacy, but I got the arguments from the Catholics that was not so, because the Catholics did this, the Catholic did that. There was a discussion. But this guy created very compelling natural experiments showing that Protestantism really led to literacy. And I see how they did it with the data and all of that. So all of a sudden, what the guy is saying is no longer opinion. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I understand.
But anyway, that's the way I've been thinking about. Well, that's why I need to, whenever an expert presents a position, if I don't want to treat it like an opinion, in which my opinion is as good as theirs, I need to work really hard in understanding how they know. And one of the things that is very important, I took these courses in positive psychology, and we took one together from Yale, but I took the one from the UPenn. And one of the courses was totally about methodology. How do these people in positive psychology know things? And I was floored by seeing the quality of experiments that are being done in that area. So all of a sudden, after I read that and I listened to that, all of a sudden what the psychologists were saying, like the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, it was no longer somebody's opinion. It was actually something backed by science, and it had a much greater influence in my life than it would have had otherwise. And I was actually floored by one thing that it was by research. People say that you thinking positively is actually good. It turns out that if you do a research, positive thinking leads you to not do things. It makes you less likely to do things. Like
interesting.
So anyway, it turns out that the way you can make positive thinking, like if a student thinks positively about an exam, is less likely to study. It turns out that there is a method that is predated by the Stoics that is called, forgot what the name of it. It's called Whoop. You have a wish and you identify the obstacles, and then the outcome you want to do, the obstacles, and then you create a plan for each obstacle. And if you actually take the time, wish, come up with something concrete, find the obstacles, and then plan to overcome it, then positive thinking does work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But
I've
anyway,
never heard of Whoop.
so anyway, I'm sorry for repeating that. You were not with us in the course, were you?
No, I was not.
Okay, I think the plan today was for Ken to talk about his feelings and what he has learned, how this reading has influenced him. I just want to say one more thing. Yeah, I'm in the last chapter of the book Caste. Like I said, it's the American Caste. It is very important to read those books about racism with the Kindle narrations, because every one of these guys relates instances in which they were humiliated by being black. And reading about it is not the same thing as hearing somebody describe it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, although, yeah, I may read it, but
Well, what I do is I buy the audible narration, so I'm reading it, and at the same time they are reading it to me.
do you do that because you have Audible?
Well, if you don't have to buy audible, but basically what is going on is that you buy a book, and many of them come with what is called audible narration. Okay, and the audible narrations, as you read the book, it's also reading it for you, and it just marks the pages. And I do that because I remember more and I get less distracted. And when I'm exercising and I'm reading the books, if I'm listening to it and reading it, it keeps me moving. And not only that, I remember more. And
Nice.
in these books about racism, where these people, describe, the humiliation they have undergone because of racism, I find that the book that way not only talks to my brain, but the book talks to my spirit. So anyway, that's it. I finished.
Okay.
Well, I'll add that it was Raymond's suggestion that we listen as we read, and what he says is true. We know that the printed word by itself is the weakest form of communication, and so when you can hear, I found it very compelling to hear the author reading his own words as I was reading in the text, because the intonation, the sound of his voice, his level of volume and all that, it contributes a lot more to understanding than the flat meaning of words on a page. So I would agree with Raymond's original advice that we do that. I said, well, yeah, let's try it and see what happens. And I have to agree that it communicates more.
Actually, I can show you that if I can show you that now how it works, that Bobby, if you
Since Africans in the late 20th century had only about
I'll show you actually how this works, okay? In a minute.
Go ahead.
These effects are independent of a wide range of geographic, economic, and political factors, as well as the country's current spending on education, which itself explains little of the variation in schooling or literacy. Competition among religious missions makes a big difference. Both Catholic and Protestant missions were more effective at instilling literacy when they were directly competing for the same souls. In fact, in the absence of competition from the literacy-obsessed Protestants, it's not entirely clear that Catholic missionaries had much effect on literacy at all. Furthermore, detailed analyses of the African data reveal that Protestant missions not only built formal schools, but also inculcated cultural values about the importance of education. This is consistent with 16th and 17th century Europe, where the Catholic interest in literacy and schooling was fueled in part by the Protestants' intense focus on it. Besides shaping the Catholic Church through competition,
Yeah.
anyway, so you're reading that, but I mean, this one is about weird. It's a book that I say I got to go ahead and stop thinking about politics. I mean, why it's about why the Industrial Revolution happened in the West and not somewhere else. Okay, that's what that book is about. But in this case, this book doesn't matter whether you hear it or not. It really doesn't matter. Okay, but if you're reading a book where there's pain involved, I mean, there's a pain involved, like a racist book by black people. Then, I mean, it's like watching a movie and only watching the subtitles.
Huh.
So, I mean, so that's why I'm encourage people to do that. Now, that doesn't take, basically you buy the Kindle book, and then they give you the option of getting what is called the audible narration, which is about $8. And then, I mean, and $8 more, and all of a sudden, when you read the Kindle, you can say, well, I want to hear it, or I don't want to. But anyway, Ken, I'm going to silence myself, because, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself right now. Ken, you're
Bobby, we watched that movie, True Justice, this week. It was really good.
Yeah.
For you other guys, the theme was we had slavery. We replaced that with lynchings, and we've replaced lynching with mass incarceration and the death penalty. And I can't remember the guy's name. I've seen him before. Do you remember his name? The guy that,
Brian something.
yeah. But anyway, it's well worth watching. It's a very touching story.
So what platform did you watch the movie on?
Yeah,
Oh, it's on demand. We watched it on HBO.
I checked it out of the Knoxville Public Library.
Okay.
They have it on DVD.
Yeah. I think this was what Ramon wanted me to talk a little bit about. Going all the way back to Freud, we've learned that we number one, we make decisions quite often at a very instinctive level. Our reptilian brain automatically tells us what to do. But at the same time, we delude ourselves into thinking we actually did make a decision. But it's, when they wire up our brains and put us in experimental mode, they find that we react based solely on survival instincts, fear, greed, whatever. And then the other part of our brain supplies the motives and the rationale for it. And an example of that is they can show people, two politicians that are running against each other, and just poll them, people who are unfamiliar with them, on which one is more attractive. And that's a very good predictor of which one's going to win the contest. It's we let these kinds of things influence us, and Freud figured it out. The next generation of psychologists put it to work on Madison Avenue. There was a book about it in the 50s called The Hidden Persuaders. It basically said, rather than giving us the facts about an automobile or a cigarette or a laundry detergent, you associate that with something that appeals to us emotionally. You see a beautiful woman driving a car, or you see a mother feeding her kids Kellogg's cornflakes, and washing their clothes with Tide, and you know that resonates with some, you know, very primal instincts. So we've reached a point with that now to where the cyber world has so much data on us individually, and they know what punches our buttons and what gets an emotional reaction out of us, so they can literally hack our brains. Quite often, people make decisions about who to vote for or what to buy or what issue, their position on an issue, without even realizing that they didn't actually make the decision. It was somebody figured out how to send them the message that would cause an angry reaction on their part, or a sad reaction or whatever, and get the right response out of us. But the difference today between the time that we develop these kinds of responses is that when we lived in tribes, when somebody took something from us or tried to steal our mate or whatever, an angry reaction was the appropriate reaction, because that would enable us to, that would increase the possibility of us passing our genes on, because if you know, the tribe knows you can just come and steal things from me and I won't fight back, I'm not going to last very long. So even if I'm going to get beat up, people learn that that's why, that, you know, you can't take advantage of me. But today, in a road rage situation, it doesn't make any sense at all to react that way. You've been insulted by somebody somebody you'll never see again, in front of people that you'll never see again, but you have this anger in you that's telling you you need to react, you need to get even, you need to do something. So that's sort of the situation then. But the difference between now and then is, back then we fought with sticks, and we exchanged information with drawings on cave walls. Now we exchange information by social media and cable news and so forth, and we fight with nuclear weapons and AR-15s and so forth. So it's a big challenge, and the most hopeful interpretation of all of this is, one, being in this state of anger, this state of attack thoughts, this state of fear and so forth, it's not a very happy place to be. And so eventually people would say, there's got to be a better way than this. So, you know, they do the kinds of things that we're doing. They're open to spiritual renewal and so forth. And the other thing is, even though we never make decisions by ourselves, we kind of make them in one of two frameworks. One, in a very prayerful, spiritual mode, or in this reactive mode. And, you know, to me, that's the hopeful part. If rather than reacting, I can take a breath and be open to spiritual guidance. And I know when I'm making a truly helpful choice, because I feel peaceful about it. And that's to me the hope that things will work out, rather than us constantly fighting and arguing and being manipulated by algorithms online that stir up our emotions and cause us to react in a negative fashion. So anyway, I think what we're doing now is something that's truly helpful. And you know, when I think about it, I can remember when there was a handful of people in Knoxville that ever ran. I mean, you would be looked at as being weird if somebody saw you out running. And then all of a sudden, just like that, you know, there was thousands of people in Knoxville that were running. So things can change, and they can change very, very fast. And that's what makes me hopeful, I guess.
That's great.
One comment that I want to make, Bobby, before you showed up today, is that I compare this book that we're reading now, How to Be an Anti-Racist, to the book Caste, you know, which hopefully we're going to read next, okay? And I mean, the last chapter. And this book that we're reading right now can really have a lot of appeal to people that are like us, which are primarily rational. You know, I mean, we understand policy and all that. You know, people like us, we're kind of analytic, you know. This can be very effective because it tells you cause and effect and all that, but it's not really talking to the spirit. And, I mean, so this book is going to change some people that are powerful and smart, but it's not going to do a lot of change on the other hand. The reason I think that the book Caste makes a very persuasive argument that we have a caste system in the United States, just like in India, and that people protect caste privilege. And, you know, so, and in fact, I mentioned it a long time ago that many people who want to be hopeful do not want to use that we have a caste system, because caste system do last for millenniums, kind of thing. People protect them and they have all kinds of stakes in it. And I think that reading that book is going to help us, for example, understand part of why Trump got elected, you know, why Trump has such a big appeal, okay? It's not the only thing. You know, I mean, people say, oh, it's all racism. I think they're falling for the single cause fallacy. There are many factors that contribute to Trump and what is going on. One of them is a caste phenomenon, but there are others. But, you know, we are really, I mean, so let me see, why did I say that? What Ken talked about is how we can, as individuals, improve ourselves. He's talking about his introspection and the introspection that we can have as individuals. It's not clear that the introspection that we can have as individuals can change the world. It might change the mind of a CEO or a professor, and all of a sudden get it, whatever, but it's not clear that it's really changed the nature of society. And especially since that this woman argues very persuasively that we have a caste system in the United States.
How could you give us just a quick summary of sort of the caste that she delineates in that book?
Well, she says that persuasively that the way Dalits are treated in India is completely parallel to the way blacks get treated in the United States. She gives example after example of how the interaction of an upper caste person in India with a Dalit, it parallels the way white people treat black people, including herself.
Okay.
And, you know, I mean, situations where things like a plumber, you know, one of the last plumbers come to your house, and she found that she was black. and she wouldn't even move. He wouldn't even move the boxes because he would put him below her, and it was dangerous. The only way that the woman could go ahead and get a plumber to help her was to appeal to his humanity. He said, "Look, my mother just died a week ago. Oh, is your mother alive?" And then she went and did that.
Interesting. Okay.
And as a result, and this is one of the techniques that these people learn being black. Something like that happens, they know they cannot confront it. She gives an example. She went to a restaurant. By the way, that this happened to me also here in Knoxville. She went to a restaurant with a white woman, and the waiter didn't bring her bread, didn't bring her. He started attending people. Other people first.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, what's going on? They didn't bring us the bread, and all that. The waiter wouldn't do that. And then the white woman, got up and said, "This place is racist. I know why you're doing this. I know why you're doing this. You're doing this because you're racist against." And the woman said, yes, she could do that and show the outrage because she was an upper caste person. If I was black and I did the same thing, they wouldn't believe me. They would think I'm crazy and all that. That's an example of caste privilege. So those are the examples, but that's the end of the book is a lot about her, but the beginning of the book, it's all science. It's all solid sociology. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me tell you all about the other book that she's written, The Warmth of Other Suns. She follows 3 families that migrated out of the South. Ida Mae, who migrates from Mississippi to Chicago, and Robert, somebody that migrates out of Florida to New York City, and another Robert who migrates from Monroe, Louisiana to Los Angeles. And in the first part of the book, she describes how horrid their situations were in the South, and just documents so clearly and then the middle part of the book is their experience in their new part of the country and how difficult it was, crowded and new threats to their children. And now we're in the part of the book where she's talking about, we're in the closing pages of the book, but she interviewed 1,000 people to document this book. And you can tell now that she's spending day upon day with the 3 main people that she's followed. But it is an emotional impact. It's both an intertwining of factual things, but also, you just feel the pain and the fear and the desperation of the people that Robert Foster, one of them, becomes a doctor and moves to LA. One just works on the train all of his life, the one in New York City. And then the one in Chicago works in a hospital eventually. Anyway, I do recommend the book. She's a fabulous writer, and I look forward to reading Caste.
Well, it's very nice. Anyway, do we want to go back to the chapter on white of the book now, or?
Well, I have one question because, and I thought Ken's summary was very he tied together a lot of things. I think he's drawn a very good, very interesting kind of analysis. And I'm not ready to say that internal change doesn't have power, because we've seen examples of that throughout history. And I think, part of the question here is that what we have to be salient of is that when we talk about change, we have to assign a time scale. And so my question is, if internal individual change isn't going to make a difference here, what do people think will? Just asking, because we've heard Ken's version. I mean, yeah, we've sort of heard Ken's how he's tied this together. I won't say it's his version, but it's great reasoning behind it. And he's a believer in the idea that we're all going to, that as we change internally, that drives societal change. And but so if you don't believe that internal change is the greatest mover in this equation, my question is, what would you say is?
Well, Bobby, first of all, one thing, a necessary condition for bigger change is for some people to change themselves first.
Yeah.
And Bobby knows a lot about the abolition of slavery in Great Britain. And maybe you can talk about how, the Protestant movement, I think what were Quakers? I forgot what it was.
Well, there were Quakers spoke up here in the U.S., but there were such a small sect. In England, it was, there was just an anti-slavery movement. One of the, Clarkson was one. He wrote a paper when he was a student at Cambridge, I think it was. And anyway, there were people that just appealed to the government, and Wilberforce just kept year after year persisting in putting things before the House of Commons.
Yeah, but the big point that I want to make is that what is his name? Wilberforce?
Wilberforce.
Wilberforce. I never can remember how to say it. He started with conviction. In his case, Christian conviction that it was wrong.
That's right. And others helped, appeal to him. There were, but Wilberforce was had an association with the prime minister and was involved in politics. But they were certainly actively campaigning.
I asked Bobby to talk about it because this was an example where some people changed themselves and started there and then changed the society. And there are some things that are kind of interesting. I was reading at one point, there's a bunch of Americans, highly educated, that part of their self-image is that they're not racist. Part of their self-image is that they're not racist and they don't discriminate against foreigners and all that. Those are the people who are, usually very educated, open world and all that. And part of the way their self-conception is that they're not racist. And it's not like they just denying the racism. It's really when you tell them, I am not a racist, part of their image of themselves. So we have a large number of Americans at this point where their value and the value they practice as people is one of not being racist. And that's got to be a beginning. You see what I'm saying? We may not be able to change everybody that way, but there is a group of people, highly educated people. They tend to be the people who are highly educated, There are people who are kind of pro markets, pro world, pro open markets, pro whatever. A lot of these people, I understand, for example, that they're not even reasonable as far as immigration, because the thought that they're against, people coming into the United States conflicts with the self-image of people that treat everybody the same, and to the point that there may not be reasonable to a persuasion that maybe you shouldn't have so much immigration, because we have data that when there's too much immigration, countries become stables. You know,
So that again, the country becomes,
if you have right now like 13% of Americans were born somewhere else, and when we had that kind of thing in other societies in the United States around the 20s and the 10th, there was a tremendous xenophobia created. If you get people into the country in a volume that they cannot assimilate in a way that the people who are there don't notice, I mean, if you get at a certain level, they assimilate and nobody notices, but you get too many of them. All of a sudden, the people who are there start getting threatened. And this happened in the United States around the 1910th, and they got, there was it happened before, and it happened in other places. So there is an argument for slow uh, immigration. Does that make sense?
I, I get the point, yes.
So anyway, we're making progress, but the big point I feel is that it's making progress with some people.
Yeah, Ramon, the other thing that's running through my mind is we are posing the problem in the sense that we're reading books and we're becoming more aware than we were before about things like this. And so the way to change the world is to somehow get other people to think like us or to read the same books as us. Lots of times it's at a much more basic level. It's just 10 times a day you have an opportunity to be kind to somebody else. And that has impact. Or one person like Bobby in a faculty meeting, one sane person in a room full of people that are all very fearful, can transform the dynamics of that meeting. And Paul, you haven't been in one of our faculty meetings, but Ramon knows what I'm talking about. And so it's in that sense, we're all ministers. Every day we're given lots of opportunities to respond to people in a loving manner or in an unloving manner. And
yeah, and I think, Kenny makes that point in this chapter 11, although we really weren't going to take that up very much this week. But Kenny makes that point when he basically ransacks the blacks as powerless argument. And, he said multiple times in that chapter that everyone has the power to do something, and that can make a difference. And I think that's really an important message. And I think that goes back to what Ken is saying. I think that's a perspective that we should all take around this question. And, the reoccurring question, what can we do to make a difference? How are we being effective when we go through this material? How is that going to change things? And I like Ken's summation. I think that, we all have these opportunities reoccurring on a daily basis where how we choose to respond can make a difference.
In the United States, we have this prejudice and in other cultures that unless something leads to change, it's not worthwhile.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I believe that a spiritual transformation within yourself is important. Okay, even if we don't do anything and we transform ourselves for the better, So I get a lot of people telling, well, why are you reading those books? Why are you reading that? You can't do anything. How are you changing the world? How are you changing, and I say, well, I mean, it's important to clean my thoughts. If I hate somebody because they're black or something, it's wrong. But not only that, what I Ken would say is it's bad for me to hate
Yeah,
people.
it's not fun. It's hard on your health. It's hard on your relationships. It,
Yeah.
it zaps you of your creativity, your energy, and everything. So uh, a lot of people reach the point, sometimes it's called mental age, when they say, there's got to be a better way than this. And they're open for spiritual change.
Well, anyway, in my case, by the way, I'm not very persuasive. I mean, I have problem with people in groups. Cannot do anything, but I believe that cultivation is very important. Not only spiritual, but cultivation. I think there's value for me to understand what philosopher has said, and it's value for me to understand how people abolished slavery in Great Britain. Uh, it really, there's value in my cultivating myself. And somebody laughed some time ago at me and all of it because I am very influenced by a German philosophy called Bildung. Have you ever heard about that, Bobby?
Say that again.
It's called Bildung, cultivation. It's the German word for cultivation. Have you ever heard about that?
No, I have not.
Did you ever read? Uh, do you ever read Hermann Hesse? Things like Siddhartha.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read that. That's a good book.
Okay, there's a German philosophy that I'm very influenced by, and let me read what it is. Look what it's called, Bildung. See that?
Yeah, I don't know this word.
It means education in German, but it's a German tradition. Refers to the German tradition of self-cultivation as related to the German for creation, image, shape, where philosophy and education are linked in a manner that refer to a process of both personal and cultural maturation. This maturation is described as harmonization of the individual's mind and heart in the unification of selfdom and identity within the broader society as evidence in the literature tradition of Bildung. And, even Goethe and, Faust, I mean, all of these things, people, kind of like, they got temptations. There's a lot of German literature about somebody starting, confused and treats this and treats that. And, I mean, you can think of somehow, like Crime and Punishment as a form of Bildung, where the guy had, I mean, over time, he transformed himself and all of that. And uh, anyway, the big idea is that Bildung doesn't make a distinction between spirituality and reason. They go together. When I read philosophers, I'm reading right now the book by Michael Sandel, okay, about the tyranny of merit. Talks about how in the United States we think everybody got it through merit, so the people who didn't get anywhere, we don't count compassion. That's an intellectual treatment, but that intellectual treatment is speaking to my soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And so that this Bildung philosophy is something that I've been trying to practice for 30 years. And I already show you this quote. And this is an example that comes from that book. See that? Show you that?
Yeah, you sent that by email, and
That's an
I
example.
remember it.
To me, that's an example of Bildung. here you're intellectually understanding that if people don't have humility and all of that, but if you understand that, that also changes your soul. I'm certainly going to be more careful in not discriminating against Trump supporters.
Hmm. But
I'm certainly not going to, because of that book,
yeah, here is so a friend shared something with me that a pastor in Atlanta published in Time magazine just before the election. So actually, I actually know this person who wrote this, and he says, I have two suggestions for Christians during the days before and after this election. First, pray like Jesus prayed. Let's pray for oneness among Christians. Second, find a way to love someone with whom you disagree politically. Listen, learn, and love unconditionally. If you're thinking, well, I don't even know anybody I disagree with politically, that's a problem. Can I push a little bit? Maybe that's why you're so convinced you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I work very hard at not hating Trump supporters.
Yeah.
And the reason, the reason is that I am very aware, humility. I am not. I don't have, in one sense, I don't have a lot of humility. I'm proud of the fact that I read a lot and know a lot, and but humility it has another meaning that is more powerful. Humility is the perception that you don't deserve everything you have. I mean that. I try to be very.
Say that again, please.
Humility to me, the important part of humility is not being, not being proud of you being smart or this and all that. Humility is understanding that what you have, you didn't do it all on your own. Yeah. That kind of humility, I think, is very, very important. And I look as I'm looking at this kind of interaction that we're having, I could very easily use it to feel very good about myself and find myself feeling better than other people.
Yeah.
But but I am, first of all, I have a lot of money. I'm educated. I have the time to mess around with people like you. I don't have any problem buying groceries if I want something and all that. That kind of environment that I have is not that of people that live on their scarcity. And so if I go ahead and say, well, look how much better I am than other people because I'm doing this, I'm being very unfair. I'm not, I'm being very unfair because we're doing this to a great degree because we're privileged in money, time, education. And so we kind of really feel bad about people. I mean, just think about a Trump supporter. Kenneth talked about that. You are a person that lives in this small town. The factory went away. The only source of the factory went away that your grandfather worked there, your father worked there, whatever. All of a sudden you are right there. And all of a sudden you see that your son is on drugs. You see that you cannot pay the mortgage anymore, that you lost your union job and you're making half you do. And you're like my father, whose self pride was that he was a good provider to his family. He can't provide anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, and that person with that kind of mind, he hasn't studied, he hasn't read books and all of that. That person is full of anger and he's looking for an answer somewhere. And sometimes people find the answer in religion, but sometimes they find the answer in a demagogue. And so, you can't go ahead and say I'm much better than those people because I'm such in a privileged position, That's what I call by humility.
Yeah.
That's my meaning of humility.
Bobby, could you send us that quote by the preacher? That movie that we watched talked about the Civil War, and it said the North won the war,
Yes.
But the South won the narrative. It basically said it's not about laws and institutional change and all of that. It's about changing the hearts of individuals. And that didn't happen. And it's still not happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that one, and that's probably what this caste thing, you just say it's so deeply ingrained. And Scott Garber, his explanation of why it was so persistent was that it's just a sin problem
Yeah.
in our, and so the persistence of prejudice and seeking um, to maintain our,
Sense of self-worth. Now,
yeah.
yeah, anyway,
Anyway, Ken, yes, I will. So I'll just send the link to the article.
Okay.
I mentioned the other day something called last place aversion. Last place aversion is a economic concept that explains why people who make a little bit more than the minimum wage are the ones that are more whatever. And there is a lot of what is called, if you're a wretched, poor white man, have nothing, you got to feel, I mean, feeling better than the black man is very attractive. Having somebody you can look down is very, very attractive. And it's not because they're bad people, because if you're in that kind of situation at the bottom, nobody likes to be the last one. So, so that induces prejudice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that's, you see that in the racial hierarchy. At least we're not on the bottom. And as far as the narratives, reading the chapter in Kendi on whites and blacks, and he's exposing actions by Republicans in the 2000 election in Florida, and then writing about in the black chapter, there was somebody Blackwell, Secretary of State in Ohio, and so I'm reading these, and it's the thought of, oh my, did they do that? It's, and the narrative of being dependent upon welfare, undermining people's self-worth, and therefore don't think that assistance from the government is a good thing. I thought Kendi did a really good job of saying we're not opposed to assistance to millionaires from the government. We're not opposed to upper middle class assistance from the government. And then, but we criticize assistance to the needy.
My brother-in-law, I talked a lot about he being very rich. He's got a house in Miami, huge house, acre, and, something like 5 acres, 3 acres or something like that, 4 acres in Miami. He has a mortgage. He could pay the house, but he has a mortgage because of the deduction. Yeah. So, here's an example. He doesn't own his properties because of the government, He's getting welfare.
Well, I think, that what we're talking about here, it goes back to, what Raymond has been very good at pointing out. And I agree 100% that the only way you can truly understand anything is you have to look from a higher level at what the data says, and, part of the reality here is that not everyone has the ability to do that. Not everyone has the ability to even comprehend data sets unless you visualize them, which is the only way anybody really understands it. And so, a lot of people, especially, sorry to say, but especially Trump supporters, all they're left to live with, and many people, all they're stuck with, is the anecdotes that surround them. And so this whole challenge that we're facing right now in terms of the division in this country at some level can be tied to what kind of field of vision people have. So you can craft, oversimplified, rhetoric-laced or identity-laced points of view because they achieve political ends, which is what Trump has been a master at doing. But you can also say that at a higher level, macro level, deeper level, some of Trump's underlying positions have some merit. The problem is he's making promises that can't be kept to people that don't know any better. And what happens is this, my opinion about why politics gets so wound around the axle, is most people don't have an understanding that we're living with problems that have evolved over a longer time horizon. And almost by consequence of that, we're dealing with complex issues. You can't produce you can't produce a solution in a short term, I don't care who you are, to any problem that's evolved over a longer term. But yet that is what gets people elected. They stand up at a podium and lay out a promise of something it's a good story. It hits certain resonant points. Whether it's feasible or not doesn't really matter because our electoral process is based upon turnout, not based upon merit. And all you have to do is tell a better story, whether it's feasible or not, and you win the election. And here's
let me mention something for a minute. This book that I was just talking a minute ago, okay, about about you heard a little bit. It's called "We means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic people. Okay, and the first part of the book is about the effect that learning to read has on the brain. Learning to read actually changes physically the brain. The corpus callosum becomes thicker. Certain parts of the brain migrate to the right, whether people have it over, facial recognition, diminished the ability to recognize faces. And, reading has an incredible way of changing the mind. For example, logic did not come about, Aristotle did not come up with this logic until philosophers started to write. You could never have gotten logic while Socrates was talking in a street corner. When all of a sudden Plato and Aristotle started writing, all of a sudden you could analyze logic. But the reason I'm bringing this out is that something similar happens to the brain that gets trained statistically.
that what? Say that again.
Trained statistically.
Yeah.
It is very unnatural to think like a statistician. Hypothesis testing, you assume something is a hypothesis and you kind of hold it tenuously until whatever, all that statistical thinking is totally unintuitive. It's mathematics, you find geniuses that are mathematicians at 10 and chess players and all that, but you don't find geniuses at 12 that are statisticians because it takes a tremendous changing of the brain to be able to think statistically, And when I talk to people and I talk about studies, I look at that, it's just like I'm a Martian. We have had transformation because of statisticians, just like other people. The transformation of reading changed the brain. The transformation of being trained as a statistician had a major impact on the way our brains work also, my opinion. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I'll go you one step further, and I agree with that. Ultimately, where statistical knowledge.
The reason I said that is to support your point.
Yeah, no. But where statistical knowledge really becomes powerful is when you can visualize. And so that's information theory, which is built upon statistics. So it starts with data, but ultimately how you can progress people at a deeper level is how you represent information. The ability to display information in a meaningful way is what makes the difference, that you can spread that knowledge. So I tried to tell this story last week about, or whenever it was, when I was looking at that unusual situation with the engine. And it was really only by being able to visualize the data. I looked at a number of different things, standard deviation. It was only when I really was able to visualize data from the entire engine, which the manufacturer themselves in their own software routinely does not do, that I was able to eliminate all other causes and point back to what I believe the root cause was, that's dictated our go forward action.
I think visualizing data is a totally different process from thinking like a statistician.
I'm sure you're right.
I mean, I'm talking about how, for example, when I read this article, I read a part of this book where it showed the evidence why Protestantism was actually the evidence that showed that Protestantism was really responsible for a lot of literacy. I was very thrilled about the data that was provided. If I went to say that to my wife, if you say you overanalyze things, it's common sense. A lot of people say things like that, it's common sense. It's common sense. If you have to read the Bible, if you have to read the Bible, people are going to learn to read. It's common sense. It takes a lot of training as a statistician to realize that common sense is not enough. You have to look at studies, natural experiments,
Right.
So.
Right, and the statistical part is really about the methodology, experiment design. Yeah, that is a separate discipline from the visualization of information, and I think they're complementary.
Our brains have actually have been changed by statistics.
Yeah, you've got to have good data. You've also got to be able to see it in a way that.
Well, to need not only that, good data, but most people don't see the need of data.
Yeah, I agree.
They don't see the need of data. They say, well, I talk to people. How many people say, well, I don't need to know what's going on. I don't need to read any economists to know about the economy because I see it. And how many people you hear that? I talk to people. I see it. I don't have to read that. I live in it. I practice. And all knowledge comes from practice, and I practice. And the one thing that those people don't say is that the sample that they're seeing around themselves is not representative of the universe.
Yeah.
My circumstances, there's a Spanish philosopher who says that, Ortega Gasset, who said, a man is his circumstances. You look at my circumstances and generalize about the world. And does that necessarily mean that it's going to be that generalization is going to apply to somebody under different circumstances? Certainly not. Anyway, what are we going to do now? Do we quit or we finish or?
Yeah, what chapter will we discuss next week?
Well, we didn't really. Well, I don't know whether. Let me go ahead and the one we were going to do today is this one right here, and I thought there was a lot of deep stuff there, but maybe not. I don't know what you people feel.
Well, I think
I'm sorry. I think the big deal is you cannot conflate the entire white race with racist power. I think we should go ahead and look at this book. Maybe look at chapter 10. I think if you just look at it, there will be some big points, I think.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
What do you think, Ken? You read this chapter. Do you think it's worthwhile? I think there was.
We could go ahead and pick up another chapter and see if we get through this one. We could go on to the next.
Well, how about we just read 11? 11 also, because we're already supposed to read for last week 10.
Yeah.
So let's try to read 11, but
yeah.
But you know, when I started reading this chapter, I said, "Oh, I don't need to know. I don't need to read this chapter because uh, I already know that black people can be racist, and you know, saying that all black white people are racist and all that. That's wrong. So why do I need to read this book, this chapter?" And I started reading through it, and there were things that I didn't think of. And so that's why I think we should look at chapter 10 too. So let's go ahead and do chapter 10 and 11 and see what we can do. How do you people like the discussion today?
It was great.
Yeah.
Was it useful?
Absolutely.
I benefited a lot from your thinking, Ken, the way you thought about it. And
Yeah, it's great. I like the analysis. I like the way it all fit together. It connects a lot of dots.
now, one thing that I like the people to understand is why Bildung has such a great appeal for me. You know, the idea that the brain and philosophy and the spirit and all that go together is quite important to me. Anyway,
It's like you feel like it's more the whole person.
the whole person, the mind and the spirit, the brain, the reason, intuition, you know, all of that go together. Kindness, you know, all of that is related. You know, that's the way I feel that the effective way to work on all dimensions, kindness and rationality and all of that. Even to be rational, you need to understand your emotions. So, you know, it's all together. It's all the whole, I think. But anyway, is this a good time to quit?
Yeah.
Yeah. See you next week.
Bobby, are
Thank
you
you.
going to send us that quote, that article?
I did
By
about
the
two or
way,
three.
Bobby, did you know that I have this book for you? Did I tell you that I have this book for you?
Yes. Yes. So I'll drop back by.
I actually loaned it to you, and the reason we thought about you is because there was a note here from you saying, "Ramon, thank you for lending me that book." So now you can actually own it.
Okay.
Well, goodbye.
All right.
Have
Bye.
a great week, fellas. Great chatting with you.